Joining me now is Kwasi Ampofo. He's the head of metals and mining at Bloomberg New Energy Finance. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
So you spoke at this conference yesterday, and your topic was, is the U.S. winning the race to secure critical minerals for energy transition? So what was the key point of your speech that you were really trying to drive home?
I think it's important to highlight that just before I started talking, I did a poll and whether the U.S. was winning the race to secure critical minerals. And I can say that being a data person, 99.999% of the people in the room said no. So clearly there was a need for action in the U.S. But I think for the specific talk that I gave, it's important to highlight what is this race in the first place. And this race is the fact that the world is transitioning towards newer forms of energy, right? And for us, when we look into the future, our models tells us that by 2040, a majority of cars that will be driven on the road or that will be sold will be electric. Similarly, in the energy space as well, majority of the technologies that would power our homes and industries would be renewable. And what that means is that between now and 2050, we need to build an incredible amount of infrastructure, which will require incredible amount of minerals. But here's the catch. If you look at most of the energy systems today, it's oil and gas powered. And most countries actually consider oil and gas as a security issue. So if we're saying that minerals or batteries or whatever technology are going to replace what oil and gas does today, then it's important to look at it not just as minerals anymore, but then as a security, given how countries always want to be independent with respect to the energy security. So that is what I think has led to this race where we see a big opportunity, and then countries want to be able to ensure that they have that energy security they enjoy today. So we looked at whether the US would be able to develop its current supply chains or deploy these technologies relying on its current supply chains. And the answer, like I said, given the audience pool, as well as what our data says, is that no, there's still quite a number of work to do.
Right. So Bloomberg New Energy Finance put out a study recently, released some results a few months ago, and among 5 criteria that you looked at, the U.S. was actually ranked number 3. Canada was number 1. We'll get to that. But in terms of the U.S., you and your colleagues have said, yes, they're number 3, but they still need to invest more money. They need more materials, stronger workforce, reduce red tape, and also more education.
Yeah.
So you kind of sum that up for us?
Yeah, precisely. So like I already mentioned, there are 5 things we looked at, and we've been doing this for 5 years now. And the methodology was actually developed in conjunction with industry as well as with policymakers. And the key questions we asked the industry was that if you're building a critical minerals or a battery supply chain today, what are some of the key factors you would consider? At the end of the day, we came up with 46 different data points or factors that the boardrooms and the management and the industry were telling us matters before we deploy capital into any country. And across these 46 criteria, we're able to summarize them into 5 broad themes. Have you got raw materials? Have you got battery manufacturing capacity? Thirdly, let's just say we brought the battery capacity into your country. Have you got demand for it? Right. So these are the 3 hard metrics we look at. Beyond that, what the boardrooms were telling us is that we care about ESG too. If we are transitioning from fossil fuels into something cleaner, it's important that the supply chains that make these clean technologies possible should be as clean as possible. So we want to see your emissions footprint as a country. And then more importantly, the final metric we looked at is what we term as III, which is whether you have the industrial ecosystem to support the battery industry. Have you got the innovations that would ensure that it's not just about the technologies of today, but the technologies of tomorrow? And finally, do you have the infrastructure, the ports, the roads, and stuff that would ensure that we are able to bring people and equipment onto our site, but we are also able to move our goods once we produce them elsewhere? And if you look at the US, you rightly mentioned, there are areas that they really score quite high. They're creating the demand. But if you take the critical mineral resources as an example, they don't have it.
Right. And so Canada was ranked number 1, again, within those 5 criteria. was one of the main reasons they're number one because of what the governments are doing federally and Ontario and Quebec for the most part in terms of helping to subsidize the battery supply chain and heavily subsidizing these major OEMs.
So the interesting thing is that the government financial subsidies was actually in, I think, 3 out of the 46. So there's more that Canada is doing beyond just these subsidies, right? So like I said, 46 metrics, that comes down to about direct government subsidies, about 2 or 3 of them, right? So there's a lot more. And obviously critical minerals is one thing that is going very well for Canada. The second thing is the ESG criteria. And it would amaze you, Al. There's an interesting data that I showed yesterday. If you look at countries in Europe, as an example, that have been able to build battery industries or battery champions domestically from scratch, what you realize is that these are companies that were operating in countries that had a very low emissions profile in terms of power. Why? Because, like I said, the boardrooms do care about these things. So Canada, for example, having hydro in its favor really works. The other thing that Canada performs quite well in is innovation. Most people don't know, but then Canada was one, or Quebec in particular, was one of the early leaders in battery innovation years ago. And they still are. I mean, if you look at Professor, I think Jeff Dunn, he's been quite significant in helping Tesla build some of its groundbreaking battery technology. So innovation is also something that works in Canada's favor. So I would say that, yes, subsidy did the key role, but then beyond that, there are a lot of things that in our data and our modeling, as well as industry, was telling us makes Canada an attractive destination for future supply chains that are sustainable.
Interesting. Now, Kwasi, in terms of specific critical minerals, you were quoted in a Wall Street Journal story, let's say 5-6 months ago, and the gist of it was that cobalt, lithium, nickel, the prices were very low, and that there was too much supply, and the picture was bearish. Has that changed in the last 6 months or so?
I think that depends. So obviously fundamentals still remain the same, right? We saw a slowdown in demand, or a slowdown in the growth of demand. I think I need to emphasize that because mostly when we say that, the assumption is that EV adoption or the metals demand for these, the demand for these metals in decline is not, the growth is slowing down. Obviously, we're not going to get the 50% year-on-year growth we saw in 2020, 2021. So yes, when you have an environment where there's a slowdown in growth, meeting an increase in growth in supply. So I would say 4-5 months down the line, the fundamentals haven't changed significantly. But what has changed is that prices of commodities is not just about the fundamentals, right? There are other macro factors. For example, what is happening in geopolitics, okay? And if you look at nickel seems to be rising over the last couple of weeks for the simple reason being that quite recently, if you follow the news, the US and the UK put sanctions on metals coming out of Russia, particularly on the LME and the Chicago exchange. And what happened was that instantly there was a shock in the market, the sentiment that this could probably lead to a crunch. Why? Because Russia is a significant producer of nickel, particularly class 1, which most of these warehouses hold. So I would say at the micro level, the fundamentals are still quite the same as it was a few months ago. Indonesia bringing in a lot of supply, China bringing in a lot of supply for lithium, and also for cobalt, DRC bringing in a lot of supply. Right. In a period where we've seen a slowdown in growth. But then at the same time, global macro factors are also moving the needle in terms of exerting an upward pressure on prices.
Am I right in saying that China has a big influence on the nickel market in Indonesia?
Yeah, I think absolutely. As you probably know, over the last, say, 4 years, the HPAL technology, which made Indonesian laterite competitive, majority of these new build projects obviously were funded by Chinese companies in Indonesia. But it's not just Indonesia. We've seen a similar trend in cobalt in the DRC as well, where last year alone, a new mine came into operation called Kisanfu, owned by China Molybdenum. And what we saw is that you're looking at a market that is about a little under 100,000 tons per year. So between 150 to 200,000, sorry, 100,000, between 150 to 200,000. A new line owned by China came into force last year, and they brought in over 32,000 tons of capacity in their first year of operation, right? That's a significant percentage of market share coming online as a result of that. So yes, that influence we've seen not just in Indonesia nickel, but then in cobalt in the DRC as well.
And just lastly, we see copper at an all-time high, and this is kind of, it hasn't come out of nowhere, but it's been fairly recent. The last 4 to 6 months, it's really run. So what about the fundamentals of copper? And when you look across the critical minerals landscape, is that the one that really stands out right now?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, you know that the industry always like to pick winners. And yeah, so it just comes at the right time that copper seems to be the darling child of the investment community. But then look, in terms of fundamentals, I would say that yes, we see growth in demand for copper, not just from the energy transition related industries, like, you know, take an electric vehicle, we probably need a lot more copper than the traditional internal combustion engine. My colleagues in our grid research team tells me that for us to be able to connect all the renewable energy projects that will be built between now and 2050 towards net zero, we probably need to lay new cables that could connect the Earth to the moon. And copper will play a key role in that, right? Beyond just these new demand, there would also be growth in traditional demand as well. Infrastructure, a whole lot of infrastructure will be built in emerging economies like India and even China to a larger extent, right? So yes, the demand fundamentals, and let's not forget even data centers as well, right? The AI boom, exactly. So I think the fundamentals for demand is there. Now let's flip our view to supply. Is supply going to grow at that accelerated pace? And the question is, probably not. Who are the top 3 producers of copper today? DRC, Peru, and Chile. And we do know that building new ones in these jurisdictions can take a while, right? I mean, the U.S. is a player, and building a new mine in the U.S. can increasingly become very difficult. So I think the prospects from a fundamentals perspective, we are quite bullish on demand growing over the next few quarters, but then it's hard to say whether supply will be able to catch up. But what makes copper unique is that it's got 3 things going on for it. One, you can go to other jurisdictions and look for the copper primarily. Secondly, it's already got a very established recycling industry. So recycling can also marshal some capacity online. But then the third thing is that demand substitution or demand destruction if prices keep going very high. And we saw that happen in the between the 2000s to 2010s, when obviously China's demand drove prices so high that people realized that, hang on, I don't actually need to lay all my cables on the grid with copper. Aluminum might not be that good conductor, but then, hey, well, if that's the work, right? So I think it's important that we should, despite this optimism, let's understand that the market always has a way to correct itself. And it's important to have that at the back of our minds that, yes, the fundamentals could be there to support the price growth. But then, hey, the market always has its way to rebalance the system. Right.
Interesting. We do remember the big run-up in base metals into, say, 2011, and then almost like the license will just sort of shut off. So great insight today, Kwasi. Thanks so much for joining us.
I really appreciate you having me.
Absolutely. Kwasi Ampofo, Bloomberg New Energy Finance.